Welcome back, everybody, for another amazing episode of Security Happy Hour. That is right. It is me, the Cyber Warrior, dressed today as a Cyber Unicorn. This is CyberWarriorStudios, and we have an amazing episode planned. It is Halloween, so, I had to, get it going real quick. But look, hey, otherwise, I love you all. You're all amazing. It's going to be a great show. We got some very important topics to discuss, and I do have a repeat guest coming on. But don't you worry, we still got some new topics, new things to talk about, and things that are very, very important. Now, saying that, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, share, all those fun things. Get the word out there, because the topics that we talk every week are vital to cybersecurity and helping new people get into the industry and what is actually going on. Now, otherwise, look, hey, we've got an amazing show. I hope you enjoy it. I'll be back in about 10 seconds. That's right, I'm back. And it's hot, so this hood is eventually going to come down permanently, but I, got to try to at least help with Halloween, because it is the last episode before the end of October and before Halloween hits on the 31st. And I would like to thank my guests coming back exactly 2 months later. I would like to thank Ryan Rosado for joining me this evening, because we've got some very big topics to talk about. Those being cyber warfare and ransomware. Now, before we get into the more serious of the two topics, because we know where that's going to lead, I would like to talk about ransomware and just anything else you got to, get off your chest before we get started. Like, what have you been doing or anything like that? What do you want to talk about?
Yeah, no, it's crazy. We did not plan this, and it's exactly, I think, 2 months on the dot. And it feels like a lot has happened, both, I don't know about you, but in my life and in the world. After we talked that Friday, I ended up going to Europe and Morocco for a month. I was there for the earthquake. And I think we'll touch a little bit later about some emergency management stuff, but I was there for the big, bad earthquake. So that was interesting. I've just been starting a lot of new things and keeping busy. And I even was asked to be in a Cyber Leadership Institute course, which has most people, I think, are global. So I've been keeping busy for sure.
That is awesome. I saw that you were doing some traveling. Actually, that it caught my eye kind of after the fact. And I had seen something that, I'm safe and this at the third. And I was kind of like, safe from what? I'm confused. What happened? But I kind of read in and figured out what was going on. So I am glad that you're safe. I'm glad that you're still with us and here. And giving back to the community, because that is one of the biggest things that this is about, is helping new people understand kind of what we deal with on a day-to-day basis and really what's going on in the world. A while back, I had Occupy the Web on, and we talked about some things that was going on with the conflict at that time. And I know we're going to get into the conflict at this time. But I want to start off by talking about, with your role and what you've been doing. And me and you have talked a little bit behind the scenes about things like ransomware. And I have seen this coming for years. From the moment it spawned and this started happening, I was like, this is going to be huge, and it's just going to keep growing. What has been your experience in looking at it and kind of reading articles and just what you've seen in the industry as far as ransomware goes? What's your take on it, and kind of where do you see it going? Is it going to get better, worse? Like, what do you see?
So that's a big question. I'm going to break that down, right? So one of the reasons when we talk about me coming back on, one of the things I want to talk about was a little bit the cyber warfare and Israel and Hamas. And the reason I kind of bring that up is because I think that ransomware went from being a year ago, or really more so even 2 years ago, up until that point, it kind of came out, and it is serious, and it can bring any size, any large organization down, to complete halt. But now we're seeing it weaponized and used by hacktivists and I think even nation state actors to attack both organizations that are not involved in war, but maybe taking a stance, almost as a punishment, as well as seeing it used, I think, in very, hitting warlike targets, as well as, distributed denial of service attacks. So at the end of the day, I think now we're entering this age where ransomware went just for profit to seeing it now be used as, we keep saying ransomware, as in the hackers or the threat actor want money, that their target is ransom. But we know that there are plenty of threat actors that even if you pay them, they don't have to give you the decryption key. They haven't always given you the decryption key, or they turn around and they hack you right back because they actually left.
I was just going to say that's
and
my biggest thing.
Now we're seeing this evolution, not so much of the ransomware. I don't think, yes, ransomware has changed and I don't count them. There's so many different types of, and families of ransomware. But we're seeing I think a new evolution. We used to have anonymous and hacktivists, and we're still calling them hacktivists. But, you and I having military background, I call them, or I prefer to kind of identify them as digital guerrilla warfare.
Yeah.
Because they are striking non-militant, and they're also non-militant. So they're striking non-militant targets. They're not officially in the military, many of them. They're taking a side, and in their mind, they're probably thinking they're vigilantes, and they're very close to cyber terrorists, right? And so there's a lot going on in the evolution now, I think, of the hacker using and weaponizing ransomware.
Yeah, and I think might have been last year, maybe the year before, and it was on this show. I had come across one because in my eyes, the hacker, we'll even say the hacker, and this is good and bad, right? There was always a line that you didn't cross. You did not go after hospitals. Like, it was all for, and when you look at movies like Hackers and things like that, it was about bringing down corporations and corporate greed and basically giving back to the little guy, almost like Robin Hood, right? And that's how I viewed any type of organization other than nation state, right? Other than nation state, that's how I viewed Anonymous and all these other organizations that kind of pop up out of nowhere. But then you started seeing hospitals get hit, which I always thought was an off-limits target. And then you saw schools get hit. And I'm like, you're now going after things that aren't going to benefit you or strictly going to benefit you, right? You're not benefiting the people. You're not helping and really being an activist. Now we're being malicious. And I have a differentiator there, right? Because it is one thing to go after a multi-billion-dollar or multi-trillion-dollar organization. And yes, I'll defend them. That's my job. That's what I do. But at the same time, you know what you're going against. Whereas as a hospital, you would never expect a hospital to be hit with ransomware. And now all of a sudden they are. And you're like, come on, homie. Like, have a line you won't cross.
So it's interesting. So I saw this a few years ago that there was, it was like something I was working with another vendor, and somehow, like, I don't know, came up that they started finding these hacker forums, and there were certain hackers trying to say that it is unethical to go after a hospital because of the loss of life.
Right.
And it was just interesting to see that some hackers, had, so to speak,
they still have those boundaries and lines.
I don't know if you saw it. It's super brand new and it's super timely. I don't think that the Red Cross realized that just days before. And if you see me looking away, it's because I have it on my other screen. Just want to make sure I'm saying all the right stuff. But the Red Cross actually came out with 8 rules for civilian hackers during war and 8 obligations for states to restrain them. And to me, for the Israeli-Hamas war to happen just days later and see, again, the cyber part of it. I know that the news, rightfully so, is focusing, I think, on the physical part. And I want to get to that in a minute. But there is a cyber part. And there's been cyber parts that are not making... What?
These days, there always is. There's always going to be that cyber warfare of war.
Right. But I mean, I think that when you talk about, I think rockets and loss of life will always be a better, rightfully so, headline than like the Jerusalem Post being down for hours. But that's an important part. Like, right. That's part of the full picture.
Mm-hmm.
What I was saying is the Red Cross came out with these rules, and I just think it's obvious that week 1 of these rules, like, they're not being followed. Nobody cares, right? And these are almost like the rules of engagement, again, that I learned when I was in basic and when I was in the military, right? And the, military law of justice and stuff, but military code, right? But hackers, there's no reason that they need to follow these, and there's no, who can enforce this. But I do think it's interesting that we're starting again, in an evolution, not of the ransomware and the malware and the tech part, but of the social and people part, right? Keep in mind, our first CISO in our industry was in 1995 with Citibank. And now
Yeah,
it's
I think
2023. This is not like,
I saw that today.
it's not like doctors who can say that they had medicine men like 3,000 years ago. So I just think that we are in a huge point of evolution. And I'm not even going to get into the fact that we're on the precipice of like unleashing the power of generative AI and how that will also have a say, I think, and have a place within cyber warfare very quickly, as well as have a place just in cybersecurity, and obviously have a place in malware and ransomware and all of that jazz. So this is a very crazy time, I think, to be alive. And if you're in the industry, to be watching what's going on. And I think it's also easy if you blink or you're not realizing what's going on, all of a sudden you're gonna be like, what just happened? So I'm really happy that we're not happy, but thankful that we're here to talk about, as sad and as unfortunate as this is, that we're talking about it, because we can't solve it if we're not talking about it.
And at the same time, one of the craziest things about this is, look, you and I, we may agree or disagree, but the U.S. is behind in terms of cybersecurity. They have been for eons. Israel and the IDF and things like that have always been, in a lot of huge organizations and huge capabilities have come from there because of the way they run their cybersecurity programs. So for me to see that it wasn't embedded into the actual nation state and how it was brought down, because if I'm not mistaken, it was anonymous for years, would always attempt to DDoS Israel for years. And I learned this a few years ago. So that was like one of their big things. For whatever reason, I don't know. Maybe they thought it was fun. I don't know the reasoning behind it. Nobody does. But for years, they would always try to do these things. And to see that in a country and the organizations under it that have done amazing things for cybersecurity and made huge strides in our industry and the AI and the programs that they've come out with kind of fall victim to the same things that everybody else does, kind of blows my mind, because I look at them as being more top tier. And if, even as top tier, you can still get owned in the way that things have happened. Always just, I'm like, that means we're missing something.
So yeah, I want
to
unpack that. I don't agree with the first part of that. I do so. I don't know if I would agree that the United States is behind Israel per se. I will say that when you think about the size of Israel, which is about the size of New Jersey,
right,
and the fact that they have a draft, so all of their citizens serve in their military, and their military, I think, is more technology inclined. And I definitely will say, anyone I've ever met that is from Israel or served in the IDF and is in cybersecurity, like, they are some serious technical gods.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if I would say that they are in just like inherently better than the United States. That said, there are unconfirmed reports, and this is where, again, cyber warfare is, I think, really important to dissect and understand, that supposedly the reason that a company, or excuse me, a country actually, as mature as Israel is, the reason they weren't able to respond as fast to the actual Gaza members invading and crossing their border is because apparently they were dealing with a cyber attack that, from what I understand, was telling them that all these sensors were either down or not working. And so it was actually a decoy. Like, the cyber attack was the initial decoy, if this is true. And that is what the IDF members were essentially distracted by, which I think is really important, because when it comes to especially cyber attacks and just attacks in the world, and I'm sorry, not just attacks, but like physical things, right? Mm-hmm. I think we need to evolve our response to, we're not going to get to have instant response in a perfect world. It's going to be when your CISO's on vacation or everyone's away for Christmas, and it's going to be the most inconvenient time.
Kind of like how
and
it is
the high chance can also be during a physical disaster, right? And so think about it. During the pandemic, hurricanes hit Florida, right? Like, everyone under the FEMA emergency management branch had for years been like, okay, hurricane comes, evacuate people, put them here. They never ever thought, well, what happens if you have to evacuate people during a pandemic and maintain 6 feet across and add all the immunocompromised evacuees with non-immunocompromised, like it's getting obviously very complex. And I think if you're going to be prepared, you have to also deal with that level of complexity, but at the same time, try to find a way to simplify it when possible without compromising your security or the efficiency. So, like, yes, it's really surprising that Israel, I think, was hit. There was a statement I was reading though that really I thought it kind of humbles the judgment, if you will, that
Yeah.
we get. So supposedly Egyptian intel tried to warn Israel like this was going to happen, and for some reason, Israel IDF intel was like, we don't think this is a credible threat. So it's not that they apparently didn't know it was coming. They didn't think it was credible for whatever reason, which we can tell all the time between the military and between cybersecurity. Like, you never know if you're getting an alert, if it's a false positive or if it's, true until you investigate. And sometimes you just don't have time and things happen. But more so, the next piece of this statement, really, I don't think I can forget. I don't remember who it was, but basically someone in the IDF was giving this interview and saying, we get threats like this all the time from all sides. And I actually have studied Middle Eastern relations and history a little bit. I've also been to Israel. I'm not saying I'm anywhere by any means an expert, but from what I do know, and I've also studied emergency management and perspectives on terrorism and to a lot of few terrorism classes, believe it or not the most fun thing, but again, necessary to solving. I can only imagine what it'd be like. Imagine getting a threat like this, that there may be intel that a threat of this magnitude is happening all the time. And so to Israel's success, they have thwarted it. They have prevented it from happening up until now.
Right.
And when you talk also about nation states, I don't know if you saw, but it's been listed in a few different reports that Iran has increasingly been attacking Israel as they've become more sophisticated in support of the Palestinians.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that people miss is kind of, especially in our industry, right? We become so blind because of all the logs, all the alerts, all the things that go on. And so when I think we have, how do I put this? Us as civilians, and even those of us that were veterans and our veterans are still in the military, you see threats and you're like, no one's going to come here. No one's going to do shit. No one got the balls, whatever the case may be. And you become blind to all the threats because you're just like, seriously, what are you going to do? When you have how many people that are going to stand up and literally blow your shit up? Let's go. Let's have fun. And so they don't worry, right? That concern doesn't trigger. But when you look at something like Israel, where you now have legitimate enemies on your border, you can only take those threats serious for so long before you're like, this source or this whatever is incredible. We're not going to pay attention to it. I think they do, but don't. You know what I mean? Like one of those things.
So like, there's two things that come to mind, and I'm speculating. I'm completely speculating. This is my own theory. They have a draft and they're constantly getting new members. So they are constantly hopefully getting fresh eyes and fresh perspectives, which I think is important. But I do agree that if you're living like this, literally living, not even in the military, but when you're living in a place like this, I think it's fair to say that people do get desensitized. So I read a book in my Middle Eastern studies, more so about living in Lebanon. And especially when they had more war activity with Israel and there were a lot more bombs. And this author was talking about how it's like, how do you live there? Like, why don't you just leave? And I think for many people, they're like, well, this is my home and I want to defend it. And I think many people, it's not desensitivity. It's more actually of acceptance of like, if this happens, like it happens and we're going to deal with it.
My home.
But one quote from this book, and I'm trying to remember the name of it. I think it was like, I love you, Beirut. And it was like this woman's memoir of her life of living there and such. It was something along the lines of like, well, apparently in the 70s, before we had security, someone apparently used to bring a bomb on a plane because his way of dealing with this was like, well, what are the odds that two people bring a bomb? Like he wasn't bringing a bomb to make a bomb explode. He was bringing a bomb to somehow like deal with the chances, kind of like, oh, well, step on a crack, break your mother's back or something, kind of like a superstition. Like, well, if I bring a bomb, then what are the chances another person brings a bomb? That sounds wild. Next year, I think it might have been from a different book. Like I said, I did a class I read a lot. But I will never forget that. Like, to me, that's almost wild, especially when, and I don't want to get into it, but if you think of like guns and shootings and stuff, that's sad. Like, what are the odds? Like, if you have, those of us who believe in the Second Amendment, who believe like, well, if someone else is going to bring it, like I'm going to bring it so I can use it for good.
Right.
Right. And so it's just interesting how different people deal within their own jurisdiction, right? On the personal level, like what we do to either cope or what we do to actually try to take measures when we are. I know you and I had a conversation before this, and we talked about dark humor and comedy. And I know the first time that I realized dark humor really was a thing. And ever since then, it definitely has become more just comedy in general, right? I usually say, if I didn't say it last time, I usually tell everyone I take my, nice unicorn there, I take my career very serious, but I don't have to be serious all the time. Because I also know the perception that if I'm making jokes is that maybe I don't take my job seriously, or maybe people don't want to work with me because I'm just playing and I'm not really working. And I don't want people to actually think that. And so part of my brand is to have some humor. But it comes with time, and I still think there's a time and a place. But it is, it's a coping strategy that works for those of us that work
for those people, for anybody who has not been in the military, not been in initial response, or why can't I think about first responders? If you're not a first responder, if you're not in the military, and if you're not like a doctor in the ER or something like that, like dark humor just for a lot of people does not make sense. They're just like, why would you say that? But it's like, for people that need a coping strategy, that is how they cope. Because if you don't
yes and no, I will tell you, the first time I heard dark humor was and really realized it, where I thought it was, I can admit, the first time I heard it was right after there was a shooting on base in 2015. And I remember my command. So I don't know if you remember, but a commander was shot and died. And I don't remember if that part was known yet. I think we knew that someone had been shot on base and that had been locked down. I think maybe we did know a commander was shot. I don't think we knew all that. It was like literally an hour after they like released everyone to kind of say like it's safe. I remember my commander made a joke like, thank God no one dislikes me that much. And I remember being almost mad, like someone just died.
Yeah.
And I actually had called my mentor. I was pissed. And he kind of explained to me what gallows humor was. And it got me to thinking. And I just think that if you're not used to it, you don't understand it, it will come across as disrespect. But I think when you understand it, or if you're in a culture that does allow it, whether it's your family culture or your local culture, right? I think that's just the key. But more importantly, if you hear something and it doesn't rub you right, especially in this world, I can only hope that we'll all have we'll take a step back and try to give someone the benefit of the doubt, or ask. I'm putting my DEI, my diversity, equity, and inclusion hat on for a second, and something I've learned about how to increase diversity and how to be a good, ally and someone to work with is, one, accept that you're probably going to make a mistake some way, somehow, and two, ask questions and try to understand the intent, and don't just assign like, oh, well, that person's an asshole. Excuse my French, right? So, but yeah, I see someone made a joke, in probability AI from a Navy standpoint is we can't do that. Their floors to be waxed. And I'm over here thinking that we're just going to have robots do all the grunt work soon. And
I mean, eventually, yeah, they're going to be the ones that do it. It'll be okay.
But anyway, I think that in the realm of everything, it's more important than ever in the cybersecurity profession, I think, to stop and pause and be like, what is going on in the world? I don't think 10 years ago, if you're dealing with like a malware infection in a company, that we really needed to tie it to the geopolitics of the world. And I think now, this is totally my thought, this is not representative of any of my employers or any of my education or anyone else but me and myself and I, and what goes on in my own head between these years. I think we're going to start to see more political science courses and more politicians start talking more about the cybersecurity effect, because the truth of it is, bring it back, is anyone with a computer can try to do anything. And we can't just, I think, assume that cyber warfare is going to come from state-sponsored, nations and their, the digitalized cyber warfare side of their military. So I also wanted to say before, when you said, the United States might be behind Israel, I think one thing the United States has in its pocket is, at least what we do seems to, no one seems to always know what we do. We seem to operate our cyber in the shadows, which I think is successful. Whereas, there's reports that Iran, right after the attack with Gaza, and even the cyber part, was saying like today was a successful day, like owning up to it. So I think that's just important to keep in mind.
And I don't disagree. I think we do, as a nation, do a lot of things in the shadows. There's a lot of things that people don't know. There's a lot of things that people don't see. There's a lot of things that people will never see. And that's both in cyber warfare and in anything else. In the cyber world, I agree with you. I think ransomware has gone beyond ransomware. And I think it has. I think it did even before it became as prevalent as it is today. And that is in that I'm going to, and it's become more of a continuous extortion scheme, to where I'm going to take all your data, then I'm going to encrypt it, and then I'm going to do and say, oh, you owe us X amount of dollars. Now, I'm either going to stay on your system or I'm not, depending on how you recover, depending on how you do things, whatever. But I already have all your data. I already have everything. You see, I dropped little nuggets along the way for you to follow as I was pulling off all of your important data, all your HIPAA, all your PII, all your intellectual property. I have all that. So I think since its inception, or at least shortly thereafter, ransomware has only ever been a distraction. It's only ever been pay me or I'm going to release all this. But then if you recover your system the right way and that it's completely gone and they can't get back in, now I have this data and now I can sit on it. Now, when the time comes, I can then go to you and say, hey, homie, pay me or I release all this.
So I think in line with that, there's two things I want to add. That the thing though about ransomware is it steals your data. Yep. Whether it gives it back or not, it aims for the data.
Yep.
Like that's the end goal. Or disrupting your organization because it has your data, right? Like a hospital getting hacked can't, it has your data and it has your systems, right? So if a hospital's hacked, we've seen it where unfortunately a child died because the systems literally wouldn't turn on, and so they couldn't detect like
a child died, and somebody who was being transmitted or transported on an ambulance had to be diverted.
Yes, that was in Germany.
That was in Germany
because they couldn't. But then there was in Tennessee, I think, or Kentucky, it was a hospital. Yep. They basically had to deliver a child with no systems, and they couldn't detect the infant heartbeat. And so, had they been able to detect it, they would have known that something was wrong. And unfortunately, that child died. And it's heartbreaking. That makes me really sad, by the way.
Oh yeah.
That's the part I feel like sometimes we get removed. We just focus on the systems and the servers and the clouds and the SOC, alerts, and we forget who's really at the end of all this. But I think with ransomware, the true, gem was always data. Sorry, and this light is so annoying me. I think now, and I can't take credit for this. I was actually at an event last night for diversity, about diversity and cybersecurity, and the speaker said, a year ago, even she would have told you that yes, data is like the end goal, the true gem, the thing that needs to be protected, and now it's the identity. And I think that especially with AI and what
do they mean by identity though?
Well, I think it's going to, I think we live in a world where we know data is going to be compromised. And so what do we have left is we have our identities. Everything from your actual accounts to, and I think that's going to be a key part in, all this maliciously and intentional wrong information being put out there. It's gonna be like, well, who's saying it? And
so you're okay. We can come to agreement on that one. I got you.
Yeah, but I think that's the new thing, because even so, I don't know if you saw or this, but a few days into the Israeli Hamas war, news reports, credible news sources like CNN and big news sources. Let's use the word credible loosely.
Yeah, I was gonna say credible
They
is
all were
loose when you talk
reporting
about
on
anything in our media.
how
Let's
an
be honest.
Israeli rocket hit a hospital and killed
Yes,
hundreds. Did you later see the truth of it was that Hamas put that
Gaza.
out to cover their own
Yeah,
because they apparently had a rocket misfire and targeted their own people.
and again,
And everybody was quick to blame Israel, even though Hamas is out there doing horrible, tremendously unethical and illegal acts. So just to be clear, right? I'm not against the Islamic people or Muslims, and this Hamas is a very terrorist and horrible thing that they've been doing. And I do hope they free the hostages because at the end of the day, the real true gem is life. You can go reset your password and lose your internet domain account, email, whatever for a day. You can't replace life. But yeah, that was all the disinformation and all the intentional, wrong information. And you know what? I think again, going back to it, that's the world we're going to be living in. And how do we verify that, or what do we believe? On one end, I want to say I think everyone more than ever, as I was saying before, 10 years ago, if you had malware in you would never really think like whatever's going on in the world, you wouldn't care. I think today it's really important to kind of understand what's going on in the world and understand what's happening in our environments and in the cybersecurity profession. Because, for example, when NotPetya ransomware happened,
yep.
and I think it was NotPetya or WannaCry. Yes, one of them hit Merck, and at the time, Merck had cyber insurance, and this was just the start of cyber insurance, and it was like over $1 million between like lost revenue and recovery costs, etc. And at the time, the cyber insurance company said, "Well, no, it's from Russia. We don't cover acts of war." And Merck actually won in the appeal because there was no war at the time. But there's a war now. So hypothetically, if you have a cyber insurance policy and you have something, even if it's not from, you prove that the attribution is not from the nation state of Iran or Israel or something,
Right.
but it's hacktivists, but it's during this war campaign, there's a good real chance that as an organization, your cyber insurance may not have to actually cover any of the damages, right? And so that is like, I think, the whole next level where we really need to start paying attention and understanding like how this affects us.
Well, I've had huge issues with cyber insurance as it is. I think it is disingenuous and it has allowed organizations. Now, there have been changes that have made it better, that have made it more worthwhile. But as a cybersecurity professional, as you are, I feel it has made companies lax in that they feel more comfortable to check the box and just say, okay, I've done whatever, da 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 da. I've got this cyber insurance that if I'm ever breached, if anything ever happens, they're going to pay me, they're going to reimburse me. I pay, I don't know, X amount of dollars a month, whatever, no big deal, and I'm covered. So for a while with ransomware, it was pay the ransom. I can just go to my insurance company, we'll pay the ransom, we'll be done, we'll just recover our systems, it'll be all good. And it wasn't until the past year or two that they were like, no, you have to do your due diligence. You have to actually be trying to secure your systems and protect your data and do
With
all
SEC disclosures and such, you mean with and like accountability to investors, or
yeah.
when you say they, I just want to make sure I'm
By they, I mean like, so the insurance companies have been doing more to limit how you can make your claims. If they
right.
come
Okay.
in and
Okay.
audit
You
your
just mean
shit,
the insurance. Okay. I was very
yeah,
confused.
and
Got it.
say you didn't have X, Y, and Z for passwords, or you didn't have an IPS, or you didn't have a SIM, or you weren't doing these security measures to protect your information, homie, we don't cover you. And I think that's leaps and bounds from where it started.
Yeah.
Where it started was we just want to make money.
Um,
So we're
I
gonna
don't know if
say
I can definitely say that was it. I think there
I
was
think from an insurance perspective, not from a company perspective. Well, let's be honest, all companies.
I guess I think that's the reason anyone maybe starts. Well, not anyone, but people do
But
start.
as an insurance company, if I can make $1,000 a month off of you, and I can get, I don't know, X amount of companies to buy in, and they go year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever, without a breach or without a known breach, I've made bank. I haven't paid shit.
I mean, I don't know if you know, but I have been reading reports that the cyber insurance policies are dropping. One, I think most of it is, it's harder to qualify for one, and then two,
Which
to
is
your
what I'm getting
original
across. In
point,
the past year or
you're-
2 years, they've become more stringent of you need to follow this, you need to do that, you need to actually be secure
yes.
before we will,
From my early experience this year, I was doing some tabletops exercises. I can tell you that a lot of the answers were, well, we have cyber insurance, and obviously I try to demonstrate what that would or wouldn't cover. And one of the things I remember finding out from a particular exercise was that only one person even knew how to even notify. They didn't, and a lot of these insurance companies have like, hey, you need to let us know an hour after you confirm it, or more like 6 hours after you think that you have the possibility. And that's very important, the possibility or the confirmation of a significant incident. And that is very important, right? And then the next part is they're going to send their people out almost to make sure that what you're doing is what you say you're doing, and that and so it's very interesting. I don't want to go too much into the weeds of cyber insurance because that's a whole different conversation, but to your point about going, from an insurance perspective, I listen to Freakonomics, which is not at all cybersecurity, right? Again, it's how the world works. I kind of enjoy it. It helps me grow and understand the world without being cybersecurity. Because I think if you do cybersecurity 24/7, you'll just like burn out. But there was one about insurance, and also they asked, why isn't there divorce insurance? And I was like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. And apparently there was. And then again, to your point, it just wasn't as profitable, especially in today's climate, unfortunately. So
today's climate would be horrendous right now.
Well, it was also, do you buy it? If you buy it, does that mean you're going to break up? There was a very interesting topic, if I do say so myself. And I did
get the premise.
kind of draw some insight, when now I think about insurance, the insurance sector and industry and market as a whole. But the other thing, I think to take away, because I don't think it's realistic to expect everyone to start paying attention to the news. And I don't want people to walk away saying that that's the message, because one, that's depressing. Two, as I said before, a lot of it's misinformation. And three, like, where do you go, right? So when something's happening now,
where do you go?
Where do I go?
I'm just saying in general, where do you go to actually count on factual information? Because I think, especially in this industry, right, when you look at the first articles that are released for any breach, whether it's ransomware or anything, it's literally within hours of a notification, and we're going to attribute it to X, Y, and Z. The moment somebody hears about it, whether it's Okta who got breached recently or something like that.
I don't know if I'd agree with that. A lot of these reports are coming out like weeks, if not months, of like, this happened and like now we're ready to put. The only difference is I know with the SEC guidance, they're coming out for publicly traded companies sooner. But I don't think it's actually, no. I
have legitimately seen quite a few reputable sources.
Let me rephrase that. You're right. When it comes to ransomware, when it's like the casinos are down, yes, I agree. You're right. And when it's noticeably obvious like that, I think there are like others that, unless it's noticeably obvious, for example, when a city's been taken down and you can't call 911, or all the city, things are down, their agencies and the websites, that's noticeable. Someone picks that up pretty quickly. When it's not as noticeable, I don't think companies are, they're focused on fixing it, hoping no one noticed, I think. I've seen I've been involved in an incident through a retainer and not seen a report come out until like a month or so later that this company is struggling to get back up because, they're reporting that they had a ransomware. And yet I knew like a month ago.
Yeah. And I think we see that, but I think that the bigger ones, my problem comes down to, especially when it comes to things like ransomware or like huge incidents that like bring down a company. You look at when Facebook went down, right? Because they passed a bad BGP protocol or whatever the case may be. I forget what it was. They couldn't get into their doors. Their data center was down, all these other issues. So when Facebook went down, like these people are quick to like, it's because of X, Y, and Z. It's because of this. It's because
yes, I do think that.
How I look at all of our media. It's I got to be the first to report this, and whether or not the facts are correct, this is what I'm going to say.
I will agree with that. for example, not cyber related, but news related, right? When I was in Morocco, I mean, I was in pretty good contact, thankfully, that I was able to with my close friends and family. And someone had messaged me, I think it was my mother, and she's like, so apparently they're putting on all of the news around the world that Morocco needs blood. And this is literally like, it happened 11/11 in local Morocco time. This is the next day at like noon. Me and 2 other travelers actually tried to go donate blood. And we were turned away because they're like, so we don't actually have room to put any of the blood that we say we need, which is a whole different story about resiliency and emergency management, but that wasn't being reported, right? So it was just very interesting to see. I don't think we can ever expect to get the full story. I think, especially when it comes to cybersecurity breaches for security reasons, companies, even if they have to disclose that, hey, we've been breached, whether by ransomware or something else, they don't want to put their whole, right? They need to protect what they have, what they don't have. They don't want to entice any hackers to know where other weak areas are, what's going on. And I think one thing, it's not like, where do you go? I think what's key for me is like, when I read something about, for example, what's happening in Israel and Hamas, both the physical and the cyber, I'm checking multiple sources and looking for, well, what's the consistency? But I'm also checking back up. So when I first read that Israel supposedly hit a hospital, I kept following up on that story until, I'm not saying I knew something, but I just kept following up on all the stories. And I think one of two things happen. The truth either eventually comes out or something else happens and people forget about the first thing in the first place. And so I think for me, like, I'm very interested in what's going on in the world. Obviously, I'm very curious. I am one that's checking multiple sources. I'm also one, while it wasn't necessarily,
but you do your research. That's the biggest thing. You do your research. You
do your
try
research,
to
I think, is
figure
important.
out
Yeah.
through due diligence and multiple sources what is going on. And I think that's a lot of what's missing is people really will read something from like Krebs on security, which, don't get me wrong, Krebs on security, great. They a lot of times they'll update and he does his due diligence eventually to get things correct. But you will see articles come out regardless of the situation and immediately say it's this person's fault.
So what I would say,
your point, Hamas and
like you're
Israel.
skipping ahead. There's something before, especially in things like this. So like if you're going to get into the geopolitical, something that I've realized, and I don't expect everyone to do this, but I will say, I think if you do that, it can make a big difference. I think we need to, and this is something I'm very passionate about. I think cybersecurity professionals actually need to understand the business and now maybe even the world a little bit better, and don't rely on the news. I think we need to go into books. So like I mentioned, so for me and just me, and this is more of a personal interest. I've been to Israel. Again, I'm not saying I'm an expert, but that helps me understand the physical, the geopolitical, the like everything going on. I met a few IDF members, and it was an interesting time because I was coming out of the military and I was comparing like their military to mine, and just little things and things they have a draft, we don't anymore. Just those kinds of things that I just thought about. I remember this being really I can tell you that having the experience I had when I had it about a year or so later, again, not getting political, not taking sides, when President Trump moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, I knew a lot of people in America that had never probably read an extra word about Israel outside if they went to Catholic school or learned in high school anything about it. And they had opinions. And I'm not saying they were necessarily wrong, but I could see, I think that there were things that I thought were naive. These were also people, some of them had no military insight, which I think is one thing. Some of them did have military insight. I think there's obviously a big change when you look at it that way. But I felt, and I knew that because I'd been there and I talked to people and I'd been on tour that was really informative and started to do my own research, that I could understand why my opinion was not the same. Does that make sense?
Right.
Why I actually agreed with it more than ever.
Because again, but this comes down to, and I think this is a huge issue within our industry and within our society, both, where we will take our personal experiences without ever doing research, without ever actually being in a certain country or being in a certain area, and be like, oh, this is the way it is because the news told me this, or I learned this from X, Y, and Z. It has to be fact. Whereas if you've never been there, if you've never actually experienced or read a book or figured out anything within that industry or within that country or within that whatever, you form your own opinions. And again, they're opinions.
I would actually
So
say you form your own emotions. There's a whole conversation here that I think
we can
lot
get
of
into
people
that,
now
but
are
that's not a
hyper.
cybersecurity conversation. Me and you will talk offline about opinions versus emotions.
I think many people, and I'm not saying it's wrong. I just think people need to be a little more aware of it. Thinking logically versus thinking emotionally. Again, I think there's power to both and there's value in both, but I think you can't just be blindly like. I think if you're thinking emotionally and you're getting swept up in the emotion of it, sometimes it can be. You're never going to understand why someone who disagrees with you, because you're like, you should have the same emotion as me. For whatever this is worth, for the people listening, I know for me, understanding this, it was really beneficial to learn the Myers and Briggs personalities, the 16 of them, the different ones, and understand what they meant and understand like what I do well or what I don't based on that, just as a starting point to learn more about me. If anyone wants, I can always provide that link later somewhere, because it's under my LinkedIn. It's actually on my About Me. It says I'm an ENTJ. And if you want to find out yours, I think it's 16personalities.com, but I have to go check.
Yeah,
I find stuff like that really interesting in both understanding me and understanding everybody else.
And for me, like, I look at it. So me personally, my Walk With Me podcast, I tell people, you got to separate when you're making decisions. Sometimes, actually a lot of times, especially in your personal life, you have to separate the emotions from the logic, right? Sometimes you have to be more logical, sometimes emotions work, but you have to know when to do which. And so for me, when I look at things like this, like, I always look at cybersecurity as more of a logical standpoint. I will always look cybersecurity logically of what should be done, what shouldn't be done, why, this, that, the third. And that's why I always, logic for me works better. When I get emotional, my emotions have three. I'm extremely angry and pissed off. I'm happy as a pig in shit, or I'm extremely sad. Those are my three emotions. I don't have a filter in between those three. There's no like, oh, I'm this. No. I'm one of those three. Those are my three, and I stick to them. I'm either extremely happy, extremely angry, or extremely sad. My emotions are one of the three. So for people that can't regulate their emotions, and that's why I do everything I do to regulate mine and control mine. I think that's why logic plays a bigger role and a bigger factor in how I see the world and how I see cybersecurity and how I see life in general. Everything I do, I try to make more logical. Like, this doesn't make sense. Why would you do this when you can do that?
Again, I think that there's power in both depending on the situation.
Oh, there is.
And I think there's balance, and I think that also we're human. So especially when you bring in, even if you bring in logic, that we may come to two totally different logical opinions or decision points. I want to touch really quick. I love infinite improbability AI put in the chat. What about fear? And that's actually something I hold really close, kind of to my core,
Emotion
values,
there is.
tenets, maybe like laws I live by. And one of them is like, I think it's very healthy to have fear, but you can't let it rule your life. Like, you can't let it stop you. I've actually met, again, this is more of a personal thing, not to say cybersecurity, but you can't, and don't just face your fears like with impulsivity and high adrenaline, right? I think that some of the best fears we do need to have a level of risk management and have an approach, but
fear is the strongest emotion to make a decision. And I'll explain. Continue on your thought process. I'll explain.
No, I want to tie this all back in. I know we're like at the 10-minute mark.
You're good. Keep going.
But when you think about personal fear, that's one thing. And I've had a lot of people be like, well, how did you go to Morocco, right? And the earthquake? Yeah, I was scared. I actually thought it was a terrorist attack when it first happened. And I'm not trying to say that to be funny. Like, that's what first came. I didn't even think of an earthquake. Like, it sounds really odd, but when I literally said what just happened after 30 minutes of violent shaking in a building and buildings around me had crumbled because I was in Marrakesh. I remember being like, what just happened? And someone's like, an earthquake, you idiot. And I was like, oh, I was relieved for about 2 seconds, because a terrorist attack would be very different. It could keep
In
coming.
our field, that's
That
what
makes
we feel
any
like,
sense.
right? Like in our coming from the military, that's like your first thought is like,
Somehow that was my first thought. And, you know, there's more to be said about that story, maybe another time. But my whole point is like, at the end of the day, I think in cybersecurity, we all have fear. I think it's healthy. Like if you're to your earlier point about Israel and, you know, did they get desensitized or what? I think that, you know, it makes sense that we live in a world where it's like in our jobs, like has our company or our data been hacked? I mean, I know there are things I would not want on the internet that I wouldn't want anyone else to know except whatever, whoever. I mean, I think we all have that, whether it even makes sense or not. We just have what we hold near and dear. Actually, if I'm being really honest, it made me really heartbroken when I saw that. I don't know if you saw that there's so many breaches, right? So one of the breaches I saw around when I was doing research about what happened with Israel and Hamas, I don't actually think it's related. A hacker, for profit hacker, hacked 23andMe and posted online, I think it was 100,000 Ashkenazi Jewish user profiles and their information. And I was reading, to your point earlier, kind of tying this together, all these different news stories about it, both like MSNBC and then like, you know, cyber news, right? Who broke down the attack in more detail for us that are a little bit more cyber savvy. And I'm Ashkenazi Jewish. And I read one comment and it was like, this could be used to have a digital Holocaust. And I was like, this is heartbreaking. Like that scares me personally. Right. And it's scary to see how data can be manipulated, how data will be used, what can come of that, both in the cyber technology realm as well as the, I don't know. Someone could be buying my address in my home right now and want to plan something against me because I'm Ashkenazi Jewish. I'm not going to hide the fact that I'm Ashkenazi Jewish and Puerto Rican and that I'm proud of, you know, who I am and what I do. I'm not going to let any kind of terrorism or hacker or whatever threat stop me. I mean, I'll be careful and I'll be safe, but I'm not going to like go into hiding. And I think that's a me thing. Someone else might feel like they want to go or maybe erase everything about them and hope that I don't know, right? Like someone can have a completely different reaction and it's okay too. And if someone buys my information, can they give it back? That'd be appreciated. Thanks.
So I look at it this way, right? I seen a video today. Now I don't know if it's true. Again, everything we see can be made up. It can be fictional. It could be whatever. You never know if what you were seeing is factual. Especially these days with AI and everything else that's out there, you never know. It is just one of those things you got to take with a grain of salt. But if what I'm seeing is factual, if what I'm seeing is true, what scares me is, see, I'm one of those people, and you know this, Ryan. I don't give a damn who you are. I don't care where you come from. I don't care what you believe. I love everybody until you give me a reason to really have issues with you. And at the end of the day, I seen that in Berlin, people are putting Jewish stars on doors to mark the Jews, which brings us back to how many years ago now of
history. And you need to know history.
So when I look at that and when I see things like that from a cybersecurity perspective, from 23andMe being breached, look, I'm one of those people that I know my personal information as far as like stealing my identity is out there. Being in the military, OPF being hacked and all this other stuff. I know you can take my social, you can take all this other shit. There's ways you can get it. I know this. That doesn't bother me. The worst you can do is improve my credit. Let's be honest. But from a standpoint of coming to my home, you see, I know I don't have things to worry about where others do. And I fear for my friends, my family, and people like yourself, Ryan, that I'm just like, if I need to go to war for my friends and family, I will. That will happen, guaranteed. Nothing will stop me. But from a cybersecurity perspective, I think this is where our families and our older family members could really learn a lesson of, you may not want certain people, i.e. Google, Amazon, the government, whomever, to have everything on you, because all it takes is a breach, and now all of a sudden They know who you are. The people you don't want to know who you are knows who you are.
Right. And that's the world we live in. And, I'm looking at the comments and I see Jack Hewitt said, using this video and audio to make libraries. I have a very real fear and trying to, it's funny. I don't know if you saw on my LinkedIn, I put up a question about headshots and are AI headshots, what's worse? It was my way of being a little humorous on my LinkedIn professionally about, are AI headshots the worst or the selfies the worst?
Yeah.
Or the ones that, it's a person, it looks nothing like them because the photo's like 5 or 10 years old, or maybe now since the pandemic, they've grown out a beard, but their photo still has them as clean shaven, etc. And someone that I hold in high regard is like, I intentionally use AI because I don't want, like those who are doing facial recognition to find my LinkedIn. And I'm like, I've been avoiding AI photos because I'm afraid of giving AI my face. So it's just kind of funny that we're both trying to be protective, but we're on totally like, it's interesting, right? And I see the infinite improbability AI question.
Yeah, let me put that up because it's an interesting question. So let me state this because eventually, once I get around to it and publishing every single episode that I have on the audio form, would you consider a reporter to be reliable if they reported solid fact based on the data they had at the time, only for new data to disprove them?
So I can answer that from my standpoint.
Go ahead.
The key in news, and I'm talking like actual news traditionally, is if you have it confirmed, like, usually if you can confirm it from a few sources, and so I would consider it reliable if you have but these have to be credible sources. So if they're misspeaking or something, you have to also report on that later, though, that like why you were wrong. I think that when it comes to news, you have to figure out what's more important, right? So if you're saying that, hey, there might have been an earthquake, and then you're later saying, oh, there wasn't, it was a car crash, like a big car crash, but you were able to cite, office city officials that for some reason felt that way. Maybe that's not the greatest example. The point is, I think it depends on your source and your sources, like we were saying before. And as long as you can be accountable, I think that being a journalist is hard, but hopefully the good ones, they are taking that into account. I also think the key is like, do you need to know, right? Like not everything, even though we live in a world where we want instant access and we want to know exactly what happened. I think that, and for some reason, when unfortunately Kobe's helicopter went down, right? The initial report just said a helicopter went down and they suspected that, and then it was even like, in California, and then it was like suspected. And they even use words like suspected, basketball star on board or something. The reports that came out were more just like, this is what happened. And did we need to know if a helicopter went down? Did we not? Like, I think that's the question too. I think those were probably some more maybe paparazzi that maybe they just wanted to be the first to report. Maybe that was more important to them. But when it comes to the news, there's a big difference between something coming out and you want to get your research done and come out with the right answer versus like, hey, there's a huge storm coming or something, and let me tell you before we lose power, or like, especially like during a natural disaster, you want the most up to date and you want credible, which by the way was scary in Morocco because nobody was reporting on it. No one local.
So
that was scary.
So Jack said it here, and I think he's absolutely right. CNN killed journalism when 24/7 news became a thing. And the reason I can agree with that is because when we had newspapers, and that was your sole source of information for news. Before television, you had radio and you had newspapers. And actually before radio, you still had newspapers. We had to do our research before we published a byline, before we published an article, before anything. You had to do your research. And now you still had those BS, like opinionated articles. Those things have always existed. You're not going to get away from those. But actual editorials that were news had research behind them. These days, in media, especially in the U.S., I don't know about any other country. I've not watched any other country's news. I don't know how they operate. But in the U.S., it's about ratings and money. So I'm going to put out the first thing that's going to catch your attention. And I don't care if it's right. And the sad part is, 9 times out of 10, none of the news stations will correct themselves. They will
They won't. They will do it in the online website and put like they won't raise attention to it. But
no,
I
they'll
think that
put like
human
an
nature
edit
will
down
want to
below
bring.
some article of like edit. This was actually what it should be.
So the follow-up question is like how much is enough research is one of them. And I would tell you that I think it depends. Because it's not even about how much. I don't think it's a quantity question. I think it's a quality question because I don't think it's a secret that, if I want to say, yeah, X is better for your health or better for your whatever this, right? If you've done any kind of class on statistics, you can kind of manipulate it to get the answer you want. And I think what's really important for me personally is to find two totally opposite or opposing views or news sources and figure out what is again consistent. But I think at the end of the day, it really depends on what you're talking about, and
it comes down to
more importantly, if you have
bias,
proof.
which
So
is
it's one thing to say like I spoke to someone and this is what they said. It's another thing if you can like, with the 23andMe hack, there were screenshots of exactly who was selling it, what they were saying, what their screen name was, like. And then to have that later confirmed by a representative, I don't remember if it was a CEO, but a representative of 23andMe said, yes, we were hacked and we're looking into it. So to me, that's like, I wouldn't say a win-win, but to me, that's okay. You have this one supporting what they saw on the dark net, and now you have someone from the actual organization confirming they had a breach. Okay, there's probably some truth to this. Is it the whole story? I'm not sure. But that's to me some credible resources.
Yeah, definitely. And again, a lot of what we see in news is bias, right? So you gotta take the bias out of it, and that's again to your point. You take media or news from different sides, find what matches, and that's the truth. It's kind of like when you're in an argument, you have one side, the other side, and then the truth. So
I say that all the time.
You bring them both together. So unfortunately, we have this in our media, and even more unfortunately, what you'll see is you have multiple of one side, one of another side, and you got to take that one other side, and then you take the extreme of that same side, and you're like, all right, where in here does the truth lie? Like, what's really going on? What's really happening? So I think we see that a lot. And in cybersecurity, though, I think that the biggest problem we have, and this is us as an industry and people trying to bring out the news, is attribution. It's not what happened. It's not how it happened. I think attribution is what people are quick to jump to, because attribution is so difficult that doing it in a week, I still think is you are still your percentage of actually attributing something to
we could go and talk about this for a long time.
Is hard.
I would say no. I would say what matters to someone is different. Some people care about the attribution. Some people care more about what was the exploit. Meaning, am I vulnerable? I don't care if it's from I don't care China, Russia, Iran, the guy next door. I need to know that. Like, I think it matters, depending on the different articles or the different news or the different research that you're doing. It's fair to say we have different intent.
I think the exploit is different, but the writers of articles that put in attribution on anything, like an APT or whatever, I think they jump to conclusions before having all the information.
Yeah, we can talk about this.
I
was listening to a podcast this morning, and I didn't realize, but apparently, like 3 different places, or there's 3 different names. So there's like scattered spiders, and they've been attributed this name and that name, and I'm like, oh, like to me, that's where you have different groups that are giving it different names, and you're like. And it's probably because they're not willing to say they can say they're all the same, but they're most likely the same, I guess. I will be honest. I have been following that, somewhat, but it was the first time I heard of scattered spiders have a different name.
One. I've heard of a few. That's the first time I've heard that name.
Which one?
Scattered spiders. I've never heard that name.
Scattered spiders is the one that took now they're joining the Black Hat ransomware group, I think is what I heard. Again, I'm not reporting on the news. I'm just saying what I heard while listening to like my Cyber Daily podcast while brushing my teeth this morning. And that I think they also go by like flying. Well, I don't know. There was another name and I was like, I definitely haven't heard that one. And so the other problem I think isn't about is the news accurate or not? Even when it's accurate, there's just so much.
Yeah, I agree. So look, we are at 20:05 Eastern time. I want you to give your final words, whether it's to help new people, talk about ransomware, cyber warfare, whatever the case may be. Give your final words before we go off air, and then the cyber unicorn gives his final words.
Well, I will say thank you for having me back on the show. I think we talked about a really important topic, and we then touched on more than I can count. Micro, super important topics within that. As always, it was a pleasure. I hope that those who are listening learned something or found it interesting, or that it was a worthwhile use of their time. I want to thank everyone for their comments and their input. If you'd like to continue this conversation or connect with me, I love LinkedIn. I really do. And so that's the best place to find me. Maybe I'll be back if I'm so lucky in the near future. Really can't thank you enough. These conversations are the kind of conversations I love having, just because I think that these are the ones we think about. So that's what I'm going to say. And, obviously I hope that by next time, whenever we talk, that the Israel-Hamas war, as well as the Ukraine and Russia one, which we didn't get into, that also has there's a whole lot of that to talk about with that.
That's where OCW came into play. Me and him had a long conversation on that one. You need to go back and watch that episode.
I will totally go back. But yeah, I think it's an important thing to talk about. Like I said, it's where our industry is evolving in a lot of ways, some for good, some for bad. And I think we need to be talking about them. We need to be aware of them. We can't get desensitized. And so I appreciate the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, definitely. And look, Ryan, it's been a pleasure and an honor having you back on here again. I am open to everybody coming on here. We can talk about whatever topics, as long as we don't get into biases. I try to avoid those. It is more so just about what's really going on in the world, what's really happening. And I think we did a great job of that this evening. I think that you're an amazing person. Thank you once again. You have a lot of insight to bring. And me and you are going to have our differences. It happens. Nobody's the same. But at the end of the day, I love you. Thank you once again. You are a pleasure. You are a blessing to have on. And I hope that everybody got something from this. Now, otherwise, if you check out the YouTube description for all the ways you can support the show and all the ways you can support the channel, this Cyber Unicorn would greatly appreciate it. I love you all. Have a fantastic weekend. And I'll check you all next time for another amazing episode of Security Happy Hour.